Yeah, I am.
All right, so welcome to another Kid Writes Halloween interview. I can't talk today for some reason, but I'm going to try and make this work anyway. Today we got Kevin Lucia here with us. He wrote a short story for the book Halloween Carnival and has anthology, or not an anthology, a set of novellas coming out called October Nights, and that released yesterday, didn't it?
Pre-orders released yesterday. Yep, and it's a 99-cent pre-order until the release, which is October 22nd. So get it on the cheap now.
All right, well, will you tell us a little bit about yourself, Kevin?
Yeah, sure. I am a writer, but I'm also a high school English teacher. I've been teaching English for about 20 years. Um, and I'm also recently accepted a position as a ebook and trade paperback editor at Cemetery Dance Publications. So I've got a pretty full schedule. So,
Yeah.
but still, I like it though. So.
I'm noticing as I do this interviews, just a ton of writers are either school teachers, particularly English teachers, or they're in some form of marketing.
Yeah, that's interesting. I know a lot of English teachers or writers who have the same backgrounds.
I mean, and I qualify too. I'm a copywriter. Like that's yeah, I'm right in there.
Yeah,
All right, so will you tell us a little bit about October Nights?
sure. October Nights is a collection of four Halloween novellas. I've always wanted to write. I mean, Halloween is like one of my favorite seasons, bar none. And I mean, I start celebrating September 1st, honestly. And I've always wanted to write a book that coincided with the Halloween season. I've only just because of time and schedules, I've only ever really written two short stories that are, Halloween, oriented. And I really wanted to put a collection out. And all of my work happens in the same fictional small town. And I figured, well, this is a strange town normally. So I figured it's probably even stranger on Halloween. So about last March or so, I started putting together, I had the one story that was in Halloween Carnival. I'd had another novella that was Halloween oriented that I had released self-published years ago. And I said, I've got some other stuff I can put together. And I asked my publisher at Crystal Lake, do you have a slot open for October? He's like, yes, I do. So that's what I spent my spring and my summer working on. Was summer was working on October Nights.
All right. So tell us a little bit about writing for this fictional town you've got. Like how that all connects together in your head.
So it's interesting because the reason why I wanted to do something like this was, I mean, I've always been a fan of those type of things. Like you got my cat here in the background, so don't mind it. Every writer's got to have a cat or a dog, I guess. I've always loved Stephen King's Castle Rock stories. Charles Grant's got Ox Run Station. Bradbury's got Greentown, Illinois. So I wanted to have my own small fictional town as well. And when I started writing these stories, what I realized is when you started thinking about a town, all the people who make up the town, and I'm especially interested in marginalized people, people who kind of slip through the cracks or that aren't really noticed by society. How easy is it for those people to kind of just disappear? And the idea is like, you got a town, you can tell these people's stories, the possibilities are endless. And I've always liked, like, especially movies, like, of course, classic Pulp Fiction, 3 Days in the Valley. I've loved those anthology movies where, characters cross over. Maybe they're a bit character in this story, they're the main character in that story. So as I started crafting this town, that became the really enjoyable part, is I'd be sitting down looking for a story, and I'm like, remember that weird gas station attendant that was only in like for one page this other story? I bet he's got a weird story to tell. We should tell his story now too, And it's a lot of fun. It's kind of like a comfortable place to return to. I have other things that I'm writing that are not part of Clifton Heights, but it's just the idea that everybody in this town has got a story of their own. It does create some logistical issues though, because every now and then I'll write something and then I'll be like, oh, you gotta be careful because in this other story back here, you said this happened. Now you're saying this happened, and you're like, all right. So the stories don't take place in any order, but there is a mild continuity that I have to like. I remember writing one book, realizing I was referencing this character as being alive, and then being like, well, in the last book you said they passed away. So either you're going to have to change the time, or so little things like that, where I have to be like, oh, remember that you did this, that, you know. But because they don't happen in a sequential order, I don't have to worry about that too much.
So do you have any method for keeping track of kind of the important continuity things that happen in the town, or is it just in your head?
Not, not really. Usually it's what happened, and then walk across my office and grab one of the old books and flip through, be like, oh, okay, that's really it. I've kind of got a semi map of the town in my head, but then I have never worried too much about the geography because really, how many of us paid much attention to the actual geography of Castle Rock or anything like that? Plus, I think it's a unique idea that I've written several stories where dead ends show up where there was a cul-de-sac, or cul-de-sacs are now where there used to be a turnoff. So the idea that maybe this town is a little bit like, Hill House or Rose Red and kind of changes a little bit, I find that attractive. It's kind of a neat idea. But yeah, usually it's if I can't remember what happened in a previous story, or if I can't remember somebody's name or like a building name, I just walk across the office and grab one of the books I remember it being in and being like, oh yeah, that's what it is.
All right, all right. So let's talk a little bit about the short story that starts off October
Yeah,
Nights.
yeah.
And it's got a long title, so could you help me out here?
Well, and the funny thing about the long title is it was really so. A lot of times when I can't figure out a title, I will just put either one and look for the publisher to kind of lean me in one direction. And in this case, Cemetery Dance, Random House Hydra just thought I meant I wanted that whole title. So I was stuck between I think the Rage of Achilles, or what was the other half of it? I can't remember. The Rage of Achilles is
Something
what I
about
wanted to go into.
I just pulled it up just like a second ago. Hang on.
Yeah, yeah. And I was really shocked when I got the final proofs back and they had kept both titles, and I was like, and I thought I said somewhere along, I'm stuck between these two titles, maybe pick one, and they just kept both of them. I was like,
Or when
oh, okay,
Mockingbird sing.
yeah, the Rage of Achilles or when Mockingbird sing. In October Nights is just Rage of Achilles because I was like when the final copy came back and they had kept both, and I'm like, that's a mouthful.
So let's talk about the story a little bit. So it's about a man making a confession to a Catholic priest
Mhm.
uh, about the guilt he's feeling over his son's death, and there's kind of a creepy undertone to it. So let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah,
Uh,
sure. What do you want? Do you want me to talk about it? You have
yeah,
questions
no,
right
go
now.
ahead.
So I was really jazzed for that, right? Because the only other Halloween story that I'd ever written was a story called "When We All Meet the Ofrenda" for Gutted Beautiful Horror Stories, and that wasn't a Halloween collection though. This was a Halloween collection that I'd been invited to contribute to, and I started out wanting to be like, oh, we need to write a Halloween story, and the funny thing is the initial version of the story was completely different. I had the core issue that's driving the father, the same thing, but I had it that it was a bunch of teenage bullies who were the culprits, and now the father has come back for bloody revenge, and he was going to stalk them all one by one, kind of like Michael Myers like. And I was just having a heck of a time with it, because it just wasn't. It's not really that's not the type of horror that I usually write, but I was thinking, oh, it's a Halloween story. We should channel Mike Myers, things like that. And usually when I get into a place like that, I just kind of stop and I ask myself, okay, are we writing a horror story or are we writing a Kevin Lucia story, because a Kevin Lucia story has a real specific vibe. It usually has that emotional resonance to it. Um, you've got an open invitation. It's going to be a Halloween story, but you need to tell a Halloween story that's a Kevin Lucia Halloween story, not a paint by numbers, slaughter kids on Halloween night story. So I ended up kind of then, going back to the drawing board, and the confessional with the priest, that actually came from a different story entirely, that had kind of like, every now and then you'll write something and at first it had legs, and then about halfway through the story it's like the legs died out from beneath you, and you're like, this story's not going anywhere. But as a writer, I'm a pack rat. I never throw anything away. I've got a junk file on my computer, and I got a big old hard copy folder where I just throw everything in, because and I started thinking of the framing device with the confessional of the priest. I said this would work really nicely for that. So I pulled that out and adapted it for the uses of this story. And I think I ended up writing a Kevin Lucia Halloween story. At least the feedback that I've gotten from readers about that story is that was a uniquely Kevin Lucia story. So I was really happy with the way it turned out, but I kind of had to wrestle myself through the process of writing that one.
No, so I recently just watched Midnight Mass, so I guess that's on my brain. But this does kind of, it had a kind of gothic horror vibe to it. Like it was very slow burn. There wasn't a lot of gore to it. So what is it? What is it like writing something that the focus is on? It's on the tragedy and why these characters are haunted.
So probably one of the best quotes that I've ever heard of about the horror genre, and it came early in my writing career. Because I'll be honest, my earliest horror stories, that's what I was going for. My first collection, Things Slip Through, I think is a solid collection, but a lot of those stories were very tropey. I was writing the Wendigo story. I was writing a Lady in White story. And around that time, Doug Winter is a Stephen King biographer. He's also a writer himself. He once said that horror is an emotion. It's not a genre. It's an emotion. And for me, and then another writer, his name's Mort Castle, and he's instructed me, and I've studied under him. We were doing an email exchange once, and he said a quote that, again, it was a really awesome quote. And he said, the best stuff, the stuff that lasts, comes out of our late night conversations with ourselves. The things that keep us up at night, the things that we, really grapple with. And for me, horror, there's usually supernatural, obviously, in my stories. The supernatural ends up being there. And that's why I was having such a hard time with the first draft of this story, is I hadn't found the emotional core. I had the father out for bloody revenge. When really, if we were to put myself in the shoes, it became more a story about regret and grief, and a sense of, kind of self-loathing and guilt, and so I've learned, for me, the stories that feel the truest to me are the ones that start with an emotional core. Now, eventually that'll unfurl into some sort of supernatural horror story, because that's also what I love about the horror genre, is the idea that there are unseen forces, swirling around us all the time, that there's more to this world than we can see with the naked eye. So I love that part too. To me, that's the fun part. But then the really meaningful part that I always start from is, what is this character's pain? What is their burden? What are they trying to resolve? And maybe they won't resolve it. Maybe they will. Maybe it'll come at a very heavy price. But that's what I found over the years is what gets me down in the chair to start writing.
Okay. Something I really definitely that just popped out of this story was the character of Evan himself, because a lot of the times when you see this kid who's a freak in the stories, they're very very stereotypical, and you very much wrote this as sympathetic. Really isn't even the right word, because that almost implies that he wouldn't be sympathetic ordinarily, but no, like he's both a very special but a very ordinary child in a lot of ways.
So the child. I'm not sure if I ever actually used the word autism in the story. It's been a while since I wrote it. But I think I indicated he was either autistic or he's on the spectrum. Um, so what made that story extremely personal, also too, is my son is high functioning autistic. And he goes to a specialized school for autism intervention. And that's also one of the very first stories that I was actually successfully able to write about autism for all the reasons that you mentioned. Autism is very often, either it's gotten tropey or misrepresented, or they're painted as either or. Either they're the mystical child that has magical knowledge because, of course, they're autistic, or they're like the child and say, like, the Babadook, which, quite frankly, I actually couldn't finish the Babadook, not because it was scary, but because it was so triggering to me as a parent of a child on the spectrum. All I could think of is, like, my God, if I was a single parent in this situation, I'd probably be going nuts too. So, and I felt like and for my son, he isn't either or. He's both. He's his own unique thing. So that was the goal that I wanted to portray in that story. And it's also, like I said, it's the first time I've tried over the years, numerous times, to write stories kind of channeling those feelings of being a parent of a child on the spectrum. But it's tough, because it's one of those things where you need, sure, I've got all the firsthand knowledge, but as a storyteller, you also need the right kind of distance. A lot of my early stories involving an autistic character will just have pages of exposition about autism and the autism spectrum and all this stuff that nobody who really wants to read a story is all that interested in. So that was the first time I was able to actually find that distance, but then channel some of that real life emotion that both my wife and I struggle with every day.
And something that did really pop out to me about the story, I like to talk to people about their influences.
Mhm.
And in this, something that really was, I mean, it's even in the title, an influence, was To Kill a Mockingbird, which
Wow.
famously is not a horror story. Uh, so can you talk a little bit about what inspired you, what made you want to include themes of To Kill a Mockingbird in a horror story?
So there's a phrase in To Kill a Mockingbird, and I teach it every year. There's a phrase in To Kill a Mockingbird where Jem is bugging Atticus for his first gun, and Atticus finally gives him his first gun, and he tells Jem, shoot whatever you want to, but don't shoot a mockingbird. And then I can't remember who explains to him why, whether it was Atticus or Calpurnia. But when Jem asks why, the answer he gets is that mockingbirds, um, all they do is they sing. All they do is sing. And of course, in the novel, there's a lot of mockingbirds. Tom Robinson's a mockingbird. Boo Radley could be considered a mockingbird. To a lesser extent, Dill could be considered a mockingbird. And what the aim I was going there for, again, though, was part of the horror, though, is there's a scene in that story in the pawn shop where the father is talking to the shopkeeper, and the shopkeeper kind of instantly understands how Evan is different, and also instantly understands that probably nobody really understands him, and then even the father is struggling with it as well, and then the shopkeeper makes the reference to singing, and then the father's like, well, sometimes the song that Evan has to sing is not always pleasant. Which, again, like I said, I think it touches on the truth of autism. In fiction and movies, we either portray autistics as one or the other, when really they're not. My son is both wonderful, loving, and caring, and it's sometimes as difficult as any other human being can be. And I was trying to highlight that little quote, and then the shopkeeper follows up with "O sing God, the rage of Achilles," which is the opening, for the Iliad, because it's the very first line, the rage of Achilles, and then so is Evan a mockingbird or is Evan the rage of Achilles? And he's both. He's neither. And that's kind of where that phrase, particularly from To Kill a Mockingbird, is what came to me when I was kind of searching for a way into that story.
So, out of my own curiosity, are we going to get any more from Evan or the shopkeeper? Because I'm very curious, especially about the shopkeeper, about these characters.
So the shopkeeper is a pillar of Clifton Heights,
Okay.
the Clifton Heights community. There's an entire collection where he's a major character called Things You Need. Things You Need is a linked collection where a traveling salesman who's visiting Clifton Heights, just one night, he's spending the night in Clifton Heights. He decides to visit the shop, and then he has interchange with the shopkeeper. Then he gets locked in the shop, and then as he's trying to get out of the shop, all of the objects he kind of encounters in the shop have their own story, but then it's leading him to a conclusion with the shopkeeper. And the shopkeeper pops up over, and I've specifically have never given him a name. Everyone just refers to him as the shopkeeper. So he's definitely, he'll be a primary character. I have a novella coming out in the spring from Cemetery Dance called The Night Road, and he's a secondary character in that. And we just see him kind of recurring over and over and over again. As for Evan, like I said, in the collection October Nights, Evan will be directly referenced in one of the later. He's not present, but he becomes a pivotal reference in one of the later stories.
So you've talked about your publisher, Cemetery Dance, a little bit. Can you talk a little bit about so how many books have you made with them, just to start with?
So my main publisher is actually Crystal Lake Publishing. This is October Nights is my 5th book with them. I've only got 2 books with Cemetery Dance. My first book with them came out 2 years ago called Mystery Road. It's a hardcover limited edition. That's really more of like a Twilight Zone story. And then my next book with Cemetery Dance is coming out this spring called The Night Road. So Crystal Lake Publishing, they're my main publisher. They're wonderful to work for. They're run by Joe Mindhart. And as a small press, I think he's done everything right that a small press should do to survive. He's been very careful not to overburden himself, because I think we've seen that a lot since POD became print on demand became accessible to anybody. We've seen a lot of small presses skyrocket and then plummet. Either because they were a one-man show, or they weren't handling their finances well, or just got overburdened. So Joe has been very smart in making sure he's brought help in, making sure he's not overburdened. He runs very successful Kickstarters every year to make sure the projects for the following year are already funded. And he's got a Patreon page, and then I think with Joe at Crystal Lake, he's built a publishing company that has, loyal fans of Crystal Lake. So like they're ready to step in line for the next Crystal Lake book, which I think in an era when we've seen a lot of bigger horror publishers, like, I don't know if you remember, but about 7 years ago, Leisure Fiction bottomed out. Then right after Leisure Fiction bottomed out, Sam Hain bottomed out. So I think that's really important right now. There are still people getting published in, the front list, those are the big hardcovers, but there's not a good mid-list publisher right now. So this small press having a dedicated fan base, that's really, really important. And Joe's great to work with, especially because as a writer, he always swings for the fences for every book. You can never guarantee the sales of a book, but if your book doesn't sell and your publisher is sitting on his hands, that's a little hard to swallow. But when your publisher is out there trying all sorts of marketing things, investing in ads, he'll come to me and say, hey, I've got this idea that I want to try. It's not going to cost anything, but are you okay with this? And I'll be like, Joe, you run with this. So it's great working with him because regardless of how your book ultimately does, he's there batting 100% all the time.
So, and because you're an English teacher, this is an especially interesting question. What advice do you have for aspiring writers?
My biggest advice probably would be twofold. The one would be, as soon as possible, find people who you trust to be honest about your work and critique it, especially as an English teacher, because I spent several years writing and writing and writing and not opening myself up to critique, probably because in the back of my mind I'm thinking, oh, I'm an English teacher. I'm probably a pretty good writer. And probably being an English teacher helped me not be an awful writer. But what I really understood when I started opening myself up to critique, and I went to Borderlands Press Writers Boot Camp, which is run by Tom Montiello of Borderlands Press. It's a really intensive weekend camp. What I really discovered is, well, you may be an English teacher and you may know most of the grammatical rules, but that doesn't guarantee that you're a good storyteller. And it was really through that critique, getting that honest feedback that really, and you don't have to go to a boot camp. You don't have to pay money to go to a boot camp. I also went and got my master's degree in creative writing, and that helped, especially because the grad school I went to was not, it was more literary. So as a horror writer, they would press me on a lot of horror tropes, not resting on those horror tropes, really trying to invest in my characters. And even now as a published writer, I've got a trusted beta reader who just rips my stuff apart and he shreds it, and you need to have that. So that's the first thing for aspiring writers is find a place, a forum where you've got, and it's got to be careful though too. Honest feedback is honest, but it's empathetic and it's never judgmental, if that makes any sense. You got to be careful,
Yeah, no.
especially if you get involved in online critique groups, which I've never been a part of. But
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
That's all right. I've had some friends who have. They've shared some horror stories. So you got to be careful to make sure you find some critiquers who are honest, but they're also pulling for you. Not like this is trash, this is awful, but look, this is problem. I know you can fix this if we do those things. I've always said that a good editor wants to help you bring your voice out more than change your style. So that's the first one. The second one would just be I actually have three. The second one would be read a lot. Read a lot. Read a lot and read very, very deeply. For a long time, I had my holy trinity of horror writers, and that was Stephen King, Peter Straub, and Dean Koontz. Now, there's nothing wrong with those three. That's a good three to start with. But probably about 10 years ago, I was like, I really need to start casting my net far and wide and reading a lot more writers. And the third thing would be, when you can financially, get out and travel to conventions. Go to conventions, meet other writers, meet publishers, sit in on panels. I mean, that was a really, I don't go as many now. I only go to one or two a year. But the first couple of years, I was going to like 4 or 5 a year, just so I can meet people, to meet editors, to hear publishers talk about what they want and things like that. And that became very, very important as well. So that's my 3 bits of advice for aspiring writers.
All right. So now's the fun part where you get to just plug anything you want to plug. So have fun.
Well, again, October Nights is my most recent collection. It's currently on pre-order sale on Amazon for 99 cents. I've been really happy with the start. I spent the last couple of days on and off as the #1 new release, so that's pretty cool. And horror short stories. So that is the pre-order sale is going to be 99 cents until the 22nd, October 22nd. Then it'll go up to $3.99, and the paperback will be available. So now's a good chance to get on it cheap. Also, too, I just completed my very first stint as an editor for Cemetery Gates Media. I edited an anthology called Liminal Spaces. It's basically an anthology of quiet, suspenseful horror. And in the tradition of Shadows by Charles Grant, it's got people like Bob Ford, Gwendolyn Kist, Christy DeMeester, Richard Thomas, Norman Prentice, Kelly Owen, Jessica McHugh, and I would love it if people pick that up as well. It's a great anthology. I had a lot of fun, editing that. The only other thing I can think of pimping is I do have, like I said, my most recent before all this was Mystery Road from Cemetery Dance Publications, available through ebook on Amazon. You can go to Cemetery Dance and buy the hardcover. Paperback's coming out soon, and that's not horror. That's more of a Twilight Zone, speculative fiction. And the last thing I would plug is the YouTube channel that we run that nobody watches. It's called Into the Abyss. And we get together, and we've only got about 155 subscribers. We only get together once a month, where we don't have a ton of views. We're all experimenting with different formats. Some formats work great, some formats don't work well at all. But like tonight, after this, we're going to see Halloween Kills. We'll be doing a movie review after that and posting that on YouTube. So Into the Abyss is our YouTube channel. It's just an excuse for us to get together once a month and watch horror movies and talk horror movies and drink. So yeah.
All right.
And then we just happen to film whatever happens. So
God, that sounds like a lot of fun. Okay, well, I'm definitely gonna have to check that out as soon as I get here. So I have my website, kidwrites.com, that anybody could check out, especially if you're trying to build your website. And I have, for the entire month of October, an ongoing cosmic horror story on Kindle Vella. It's called Divided. Please go check it out. Meanwhile, I have been Michael Kidd from Kid Writes, and we have been talking to Kevin Lucia. Thank you so much for being on today, Kevin.
thanks for having me.
And you have a very happy Halloween.
You too.